Hello everybody. Welcome to my channel again. This is Kurt Wang. Today we're going to talk about metering mode. What metering mode you should use for your landscape photos. To answer that question, first we need to understand what is metering mode and what different metering mode can do. First, what is metering? What is a metering system? Light is an essential element for photography. In order to measure the amount of light coming through the lens into the sensor, we need a system, a measurement to judge if the exposure is too much or not enough. This is what metering system can do. The metering system in the camera will measure the amount of light coming into the camera and then give you a suggestion and an indication, tell you your photo is overexposed or underexposed. So what is the criteria the metering system use to judge the light, to judge the exposure? Now here we're going to talk about the concept called middle gray. A subject in your photo could be completely white or completely black. So middle gray is the color, the light condition in the middle of this range. Because middle gray, also called 18% gray, is very neutral, is very simple to measure. So most of the camera system use middle gray as the guideline to measure the light, to measure the exposure. Now let's talk about different type of metering mode. Different camera systems, they have a different name and different metering mode. But overall, they all have this 4 basic metering mode. The first one is evaluative metering mode. It's called multi in Sony, matrix in Nikon, evaluative in Canon camera. The second one is called a partial metering mode. Third one is a spot metering mode. And the last one is a center weighted metering mode. Let's talk about the difference of them. The first metering mode I'm going to talk about is evaluative, multi, or matrix metering mode. This is the most used metering mode, and it's also most of the cameras' default metering mode. So what this metering mode does is it will divide the whole thing into a series of smaller reading zoom and get the average exposure and give you an indication if it's overexposed or underexposed. Many people didn't know. It also connects with your focus point. So if your focus point is in the middle on the side of different area of the frame, this metering mode will give a slight consideration around your focus point. We'll give a little bit more consideration for that area. But still, it'll calculate the rest of the frame and check the average. So keep that in mind. You can still do a little bit job just like spot or partial metering, but it's more average for the whole thing.
For example, here, when we choose somewhere very neutral, it shows competition is 0. If I click on somewhere in the dark area, it becomes underexposed. I click on highlight, it's overexposed.
That's probably most used metering mode, especially if there's no big contrast. It's a pretty mild light condition, or when you in a rush. Your light changing is very fast. You don't have time to think too much about metering mode. This is the best metering mode you can use. The second metering mode I want to talk about is a partial metering. Just like its name, it only targets small area around your focus point, usually about 6% of the entire frame. Each camera system have a different percentage of setting, but they're all similar. So that means the camera only measures the middle gray in that small area around your focus point. That's called partial metering mode. What this mode can do, this mode is ideal for you to choose a targeted subject, especially when there's a strong contrast in the scene. For example, a strong light at the background, like could be sunrise, sunset. Mostly when you shoot backlit, it helps a lot.
For example, here, when I move the camera, the focus point move from a neutral area to highlight, it shows it overexposed. When I move down to the shadow, it shows it's underexposed.
Next, let's talk about spot metering mode. Just like its name, only targets a small spot. Similar to partial metering mode, but this is much smaller. It only calculates the light, the middle gray, the light condition on your focus point around that small, very small area. Usually 1.5% of your entire frame. Each camera have a different percentage, but they all the same, very small. This is very useful metering mode. The same thing, similar to partial metering. When there's a strong contrast, there's a quite different light condition in the whole frame, but you want to focus on the subject that you mainly want to show the audience, then you pick that spot for your metering. However, because this metering spot have to be very accurate, it's very small area, so I wouldn't suggest beginner use this metering mode. It could be very tricky, right? If you're not sure, still use partial metering if you have to handle a strong contrast. The other useful situation for this metering mode is when you shoot moon at night, when the moon is so bright but surrounding is so dark. In this case, you can use the spot metering and to accurately point to the moon, so the camera will expose based on the moonlight, not the surrounding. Otherwise, gonna be overexposed. So now let's talk about center-weighted metering mode. This metering mode, just like its name, it mostly focuses on the center of the frame. This mode is just like evaluative metering mode with autofocus point in the middle of your frame. It gives most consideration to the center, usually 60 to 80%. It will still calculate the rest of the area, but mostly will give its consideration measurement to the center of the frame. In this case, if you can even try by yourself. If you use this metering mode, your focus point is the edge of the frame, on the top, or at the bottom. It won't change much because it gives consideration mostly in the middle of the frame. So very obvious. So this metering mode is ideal for your subject in the middle of your frame. There are a few other metering mode in different camera. For example, there's a highlight metering mode in Nikon camera. Basically, it just protect the highlight from overexpose. And also there's a entire screen average mode in some of the Sony's camera. It just calculates the overall brightness in the whole thing, like give an average value for that. It's time to answer the final question. What metering mode you should use for your landscape photo? There's no one mode fit all. We've talked about each different metering mode can do. So I will divide the situation into two sections. First is low contrast, and the other the high contrast situation. So when the scene doesn't have a strong contrast, there's no bright light, no something very dark, black, is more average. Overall, the whole thing is already close to the middle gray. For example, if the sky is just overcast, cloudy, it doesn't have the sun show up, in that situation, you can use the evaluative, multi, or matrix metering mode, which will average the whole thing. For landscape photo, you want to show all the details in different parts. Even in the shadow and the highlight, you want to show everything. So it's ideal to use this metering mode when there is a low contrast. It could be inside woodline or somewhere you don't have a strong light coming into the frame. The other situation is a high contrast situation when there's a strong light condition. For example, you're shooting backlit, sunrise, sunset. Those are the best situation. You need to use partial metering or spot metering. Why we use that? Because you can make sure your camera only target the area that you choose. Especially when you shoot backlit, there's a strong light in the background. You want to show detail of the subject. The subject could become a silhouette if you expose for the sky, and the silhouette probably doesn't have much details. It's just a black piece. So in that way, you don't want to leave control to the camera. You want to control it. Then you use a partial metering or spot metering. As I mentioned at the beginning, spot metering could be a little bit tricky. They can do the same job as partial metering, but it's more accurate. Usually, if you're very experienced or your subject is really very small, then you use the spot metering. So overall, it will be two sections: low contrast and high contrast. I also look at things in a different perspective. From a composition perspective, if your composition is very complicated, you have lots of details, layers from far to near, from lots of background to lots of foreground. In a situation like that, right, you may want to use evaluative matrix or multi. In this way, it can average the exposure for the whole thing. The other composition situation is it's very minimal, very simplified. So in that way, you probably focus on something that is the main subject that you want people to see the most, and then you focus on that one by using partial or spot metering. Another way we can look at landscape photo is from the light resource perspective. When there is a light resource from sun, moon, star, and man-made light, for example, city light. If there's a sun in frame, right? I already mentioned at the beginning, it's like create a high contrast, you're gonna use a partial or spot metering. However, sometimes the sun probably from the side, it light up the frame, but not directly in the frame. It really depends on the situation, how strong that light is. You can still use evaluated metering mode if the sunlight is not that strong, right? And also, even it's a little bit strong, you can still choose to use evaluative, multi, or matrix metering mode, because as I mentioned at the beginning, it also works with your focus point, right? So it still have a little bit function like partial metering or spot metering. If there's a moon in frame, it'll be a little bit complicated. It depends on the timing. If it's dark at night, you just shoot moon in the sky with everything surrounding dark. And we mentioned at the beginning, you need to use a spot metering so you can just expose for the moon. So make sure the moon won't be overexposed. However, if you shoot the moon with some foreground, like in a little bit complicated composition, you may have some skyline or some foreground, mountain, something in the foreground with the moon in frame. That depends on light condition. If it's just twilight, sometimes moonrise happening during twilight, the sun just setting, or when moon is setting, the sun just come up. You still have lots of light, and that didn't create a lot of strong contrast. You can easily use one exposure to get both foreground and the moon. In that case, you can use evaluative multi or matrix metering mode. It'll average the whole thing. However, if the light condition change to a little bit darker, it'll be tricky, because when you want to expose for the foreground, the moon already overexposed. In that way, you may still need to use partial or spot metering to control your metering system. When shooting star like Milky Way or starry night, you don't need to use spot metering, because it's gonna be hard to just pick one star. So usually just use the evaluative metering, right? You can adjust your exposure composition to control it, but usually you want the whole sky to be captured in your frame. Even sometimes we need to get some good foreground there too, right? Let's talk about man-made light. If you shoot something, like say the escape photo, for example, skyline or something, it really depends. If there's some of the light is too close to you, too strong, could be a street lamp, something like that, you gotta be careful, right? So that create a great contrast. You may have to use partial metering. But usually if you're shooting a lot of light, they're pretty average. They have light here and there, pretty much average. You can still use evaluative multi or matrix metering mode. So that's my answer for you. What metering mode you should use for your landscape photos. Okay, now I'm gonna give you my bonus tip at the end of this video. What if your metering mode was chosen wrong? What if the metering reading doesn't work for you? What do you do to fix it? Okay, there's one thing you're gonna know. The metering mode is not a final result. It's mostly a starting point for exposure. If it doesn't work for you, you need to make adjustment. So there's 3 ways you can fix it. First is use your exposure composition. So at the bottom, you will see the exposure composition bar. If the metering shows it's too dark, or maybe even it shows at 0 in the middle, the camera thinks it's already perfect. However, for you, probably doesn't work. You probably chose the wrong metering mode. Maybe the whole thing is not bright enough. So you can just change your shutter speed, aperture, ISO to make adjustment, and you can even expose to the right or expose to the left, which means that you can make it like overexposed. It will show it's a positive one or negative one. That's okay. Don't have to always follow 0. These days, especially on mirrorless camera, you can see the result on your screen or viewfinder immediately. If the camera setup is perfect, but you don't think so, you can make adjustment. So the final decision is still yourself. Even the metering mode doesn't work for you, after you do adjustment, you can fix it. The other option is use shooting HDR or exposure bracketing. Sometimes no matter what metering mode you use, it still wouldn't work, especially if there is a strong contrast. No matter you focus or expose for the sky or expose for the foreground, not gonna work, because probably when the foreground shows all the details, sky already overexposed. In this situation, you can shoot exposure bracketing, or we call it HDR. You can shoot 3 or 5 or even more photo. So the one underexposed is more to protect the highlight focus, is to protect the sky from overexposed, right? The one overexposed is more to make the foreground have more details, lift up the shadow. That's how you can fix it. When you have a bigger contrast, you want to balance that, you can use HDR to fix it. The last method I would suggest is when you're not sure, is like pretty tricky, you can also look at your histogram. So ideally the histogram should have most of the data in the middle. If a touch loss on your right side, that means it's too much highlight. It's lots of part of the photo already overexposed, or it touched the left. That means there's lots of shadow in the frame, lots of things underexposed, right? You want things more in the middle, more neutral. That's it for this video. I hope this can help you to judge and choose what metering mode you should use when shooting landscape photos. Okay, until next time, bye for now.